The old west wing of Buckingham Palace had long been abandoned for formal use, its corridors dusty, its gilded walls dulled by time, yet it retained a whisper of the grandeur that once defined it. Guard Sergeant Thomas Aldridge moved cautiously through the dimly lit hall, the polished leather of his boots making no sound on the worn carpet. He had served the crown for decades, and while he knew every corridor, every hidden alcove, every echoing stairwell, even he felt a prickle of unease as he approached this forgotten section of the palace. Tonight, the air was thick with secrecy, the faint scent of wax and aged wood mingling with something darker, more urgent. Thomas had been stationed in the West Wing for hours, patrolling with the silent diligence expected of a multi-generational guard. The tapestries depicting long-forgotten battles and monarchs seemed to watch him, their faded faces twisted in shadows that danced under the flickering light of brass wall sconces. Each step he took was careful, deliberate, not just out of duty, but out of an instinct honed over years of navigating royal intrigue. This wing was supposed to be empty, a relic of the past, yet tonight something felt disturbingly alive. He paused near the entrance to a side gallery, listening intently. The faint rustle of silk reached his ears, followed by a softer, almost imperceptible shuffle, too deliberate to be the wind brushing against the cracked windows. Someone was here, someone moving quietly, yet with purpose. Thomas's hand instinctively rested near his sword hilt, a silent preparation for whatever or whoever he might encounter. His instincts had never failed him. They had saved the royal family more times than he could count. Tonight, he would rely on them again. Buckingham Palace was a living organism of protocol, ritual, and hierarchy. Even after years of service, Thomas never stopped marveling at the delicate choreography of life within its walls. Every step of the staff, every movement of the royals, even the seemingly insignificant opening and closing of doors had meaning. And the old West Wing, though neglected, was no exception. It had been the backdrop of long-forgotten affairs, secret councils, and clandestine meetings, the air still carrying echoes of whispers that had shaped the monarchy in ways no public history would ever reveal. Thomas's thoughts drifted briefly to Prince Harry, the younger royal whose actions often sparked tension within these walls. Harry had always walked the line between rebellion and duty, charm and chaos. He had a history of moving through these corridors quietly, but purposefully. The thought of him in the old West Wing tonight, and for reasons unknown, set Thomas's nerves on edge. There was always a purpose when a royal chose secrecy, and Thomas knew better than to underestimate it. A sudden creak of the floorboards to his left snapped him fully into awareness. He froze, eyes scanning the shadowed gallery. Moonlight filtered through the tall windows, catching dust particles in a spectral dance. He could see the faint outline of a figure slipping silently toward one of the old storage chambers, a dark shape against the dim light. Thomas's pulse quickened. Whoever this was, they were not here for idle exploration. The rhythm of their movement betrayed urgency, almost fear. He stepped lightly forward, keeping to the shadows, hand ready on the sword hilt. The palace had taught him patience. Rash action here could ruin everything. He had to know what the figure carried and why it mattered. The corridor smelled faintly of aged wood and lavender polish, but beneath that was a sharper scent, metallic and acrid. Thomas's training told him it was a sign of something unusual, something dangerous. A soft whisper reached him, carried faintly from a side doorway. "It must not be seen, not by anyone." The voice was unmistakable, low and controlled, yet threaded with tension. Thomas's heart tightened. It was Harry. He recognized the cadence of the younger prince's speech, the subtle edge of caution that always accompanied his secretive movements. Thomas had encountered Harry in such circumstances before, though never like this, never carrying the weight of something that caused even the palace staff to tremble in anticipation. The guard crouched slightly behind a heavy velvet drape, keeping himself hidden as he assessed the situation. Prince Harry was moving toward an ancient wooden chest tucked against the far wall, one of the few remaining relics of the old West Wing's ceremonial past. The chest, locked with tarnished brass clasps, had been rumored among the staff to contain forgotten documents and artifacts, items so sensitive that their existence was scarcely acknowledged. Tonight, however, Harry's movement suggested he was retrieving something far more urgent, far more volatile than ordinary relics. Thomas's pulse quickened as he watched the prince lift the chest's heavy lid, revealing a bundle wrapped in thick, worn cloth. The movement was deliberate, careful, almost reverent. What could Harry be hiding? Something harmless, like papers or keepsakes, seemed unlikely given the way his eyes darted toward the corridor entrances. His awareness was sharp, protective. The palace staff had a word for this: Harry's shadows. Those moments when the prince moved unseen, guided by purpose and secrecy. And now, Thomas was about to witness the most consequential of these shadows. He moved closer, silently. Every step a careful negotiation with the polished floor and the scattered debris of the abandoned wing. The bundle Harry carried was heavy, the strain evident in the younger royal's stance. Yet there was also precision in his movements, a meticulous care that suggested he knew exactly what he held and why it mattered. Thomas's mind raced. Staff rumors, whispers in the corridors, and the faintest leaks of palace gossip had hinted at dangerous objects, forbidden letters, even concealed artifacts that could scandalize the royal household if discovered. What Harry held now, Thomas suspected, belonged in that list. The air in the corridor thickened as Thomas crouched behind a marble column, heart hammering. Outside, the faint murmur of staff completing their nightly rounds was a ghostly reminder that the palace never truly slept. The old wing, abandoned though it was, carried its own life, a slow, deliberate rhythm of creaks, drafts, and the faint echo of history pressing against the present. And in that pressure, Thomas sensed both threat and urgency. Harry, unaware of Thomas's presence, moved to a narrow side chamber, where the moonlight revealed the object partially, a small, ornate box, covered in locks, carvings, and the unmistakable gleam of something precious. The prince's hands trembled slightly as he lifted it, the weight evident. He whispered something under his breath, the words unintelligible but heavy with intent. Thomas's eyes narrowed. The object was not just important, it was dangerous. The kind of danger that terrified the staff, that demanded secrecy, that could disrupt everything if mishandled. Thomas knew the moment to act was approaching. His loyalty demanded vigilance. His experience demanded patience. And his instinct demanded protection not just for the royal family, but for the staff, the palace, and the fragile equilibrium of secrecy that defined these walls. One wrong move could ignite scandal, provoke anger, and compromise both duty and life. And yet, he could not turn away. What Harry carried had already cast a shadow over the night, a shadow Thomas would have to confront. A faint scuffle from behind a staff member closing a door. The subtle sound of silk brushing a corridor reminded Thomas that others were near, oblivious to the danger that Harry's secret represented. The palace, grand and intricate, with its endless halls and hidden alcoves, was both protector and peril. Every creak, every shadow, every flicker of candlelight seemed to whisper warnings. Thomas tightened his grip on the sword hilt, ready for whatever revelation or confrontation awaited. The old West Wing, silent yet charged, seemed to lean in, its walls keeping their centuries-old secrets, while a new, urgent story unfolded in its midst. Harry, the box, the secrecy all converged here, and Thomas Aldridge, sentinel of the crown, knew the night was far from over. The first spark of suspense had ignited, and the consequences would ripple through the palace, terrifying staff, testing loyalties, and forcing truths into the open in ways no one could yet predict. The air in the old West Wing had grown colder, carrying a faint draft that stirred the edges of Thomas Aldridge's uniform. His eyes remained locked on Prince Harry, who crouched over the small ornate box, the moonlight glinting off its polished brass lock. The faint whisper of silk behind him caught Thomas's attention. Someone was approaching from the corridor leading to the staff quarters. He tensed, ready to intercept, yet he remained concealed, observing the scene unfold like a predator sizing up its surroundings. A junior palace aide, clutching a silver tray of documents, stepped into view. She was young, inexperienced, and clearly unaware of the significance of the moment. Her soft footsteps echoed against the worn carpet, too hesitant, too irregular to be ignored. She glanced toward the far end of the hall, her expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Thomas's pulse quickened. Even the most innocuous intrusion here could unravel the fragile secrecy surrounding Harry's mission. "Who's there?" Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible to himself. The aide froze mid-step, sensing a presence, but saw nothing beyond the shadows. Thomas gestured subtly, guiding her behind a pillar, away from the prince and the box. Her wide eyes reflected fear and trust, and he gave a slight nod, signaling that she must remain hidden. She nodded faintly, as if understanding the gravity without needing words, and Thomas turned his full attention back to Harry. The prince had lifted the ornate box now, his hand steady despite the tension radiating from every movement. He whispered to himself, words lost in the rustle of the drafts that haunted the corridor. Thomas strained to hear, but the sound was muffled, indistinguishable, yet heavy with intention. The package in Harry's hands radiated secrecy and peril. It was clear that its contents were not merely personal, but potentially alarming. Something about the way he handled it, the care, the subtle fear, told Thomas that this was more than a clandestine visit. A faint, scuffling sound came from the old service staircase nearby. Thomas froze, muscles taut, heart hammering. Another staff member, likely a night cleaner or an observant footman, was moving too close to the scene. The palace had trained its staff well, yet curiosity was a potent force, and the quiet corridors of the old West Wing were a temptation too strong for anyone unaware of the danger. Thomas's mind raced. If the wrong person glimpsed the box, if a word escaped, the consequences could reach the king's ears before the night ended. He shifted silently, keeping himself hidden in the shadows, and watched as Harry maneuvered toward a narrow side chamber where the moonlight fell in a silver shaft through a high window. The box, small yet weighted with significance, glimmered faintly in his hands. Thomas noticed the faint metallic scent that accompanied it, a combination of polished brass, aged wood, and something sharper, almost acrid, that set his instincts on high alert. The staff's whispered rumors had spoken of forbidden items, dangerous artifacts, and letters meant only for the eyes of the king or close advisors. Thomas now understood the terror they carried. Suddenly, a muffled thump echoed from the side chamber. Thomas's head snapped toward the sound, eyes narrowing. A shadow passed along the corridor, a figure moving with stealth, deliberate yet cautious. Thomas recognized immediately the figure as one of the palace's trusted senior aides, tasked with oversight but not normally present in the Old West Wing at this hour. The timing was uncanny, the purpose deliberate. Someone had caught wind of Harry's secret visit, or perhaps had been sent. Either scenario demanded vigilance, quick thinking, and a steady hand. "Thomas!" the aide whispered, barely audible. His voice trembled, betraying a mixture of fear and excitement. What is he carrying? It smells. It's strange." Thomas glanced down, meeting the young aide's eyes, and felt the weight of his responsibility tighten around him. If he revealed too much, panic could ripple through the staff. If he acted too soon, Harry's secret would be compromised. The night demanded discretion, calculation, and courage. Thomas gestured subtly, bringing the aide closer behind the marble pillar. "Stay quiet," he hissed. "Do not move until I give the signal. This is not ordinary business. Whatever Harry carries, it is dangerous, and if anyone sees it, there will be consequences beyond your imagination." The aide nodded, fear etched across his features, and Thomas felt the burden of guardianship grow heavier. He was not merely protecting the prince or the palace. He was shielding every unsuspecting soul who could stumble into peril. Harry paused in the side chamber, gently lowering the box onto a small table, the brass locks glinting under the silvered moonlight. Thomas's instincts screamed that the contents of the box were fragile in more than a physical sense. They contained a secret with the power to terrify, to disrupt, to ignite scandal. Every movement Harry made was measured, almost ritualistic, a silent acknowledgement of the peril the object carried. Thomas's pulse quickened, the tension nearly unbearable. The faintest sound, a whispered breath, a shuffle of silk drew Thomas's attention again. Another figure had entered the corridor, moving deliberately but quietly. It was a housekeeper, unaware of the unfolding drama, drawn perhaps by curiosity or routine. Thomas shifted instinctively, stepping forward, hands hovering near the sword hilt. He needed to intercept without alarming Harry, without exposing the box, without drawing the attention of anyone else. One false step could trigger chaos. As the housekeeper passed, Thomas guided her gently behind a decorative screen, keeping her hidden. The young aide gasped softly but remained silent, and Thomas returned his focus to Harry. The prince's fingers lingered over the edges of the box, tracing its contours with a care that bespoke reverence. Yet there was a tension in his stance, a subtle rigidity that spoke to the fear underlying the secrecy. Thomas understood instantly. This was no ordinary delivery, no mere memento. This was something that terrified even the staff entrusted with palace security. The soft rustle of pages and the metallic click of the locks echoed faintly. Yet Thomas discerned another sound beneath it, a muffled exclamation, barely audible, coming from the direction of the grand hallway. Someone else was moving through the palace, drawn perhaps by rumor, curiosity, or the sheer magnetism of secrecy. Thomas felt the stakes climb higher with each heartbeat. The Old West Wing, abandoned yet alive with history, had become a stage for tension, intrigue, and unseen danger. He crouched behind a column, muscles coiled, senses stretched taut. The moonlight illuminated Harry's face as he finally opened the box, revealing only a glimpse of its contents before Thomas instinctively shielded the young aide's eyes. The first sight was enough, a glint of something metallic, delicate yet powerful, exuding an aura of danger that Thomas instinctively recognized. It was a treasure of the royal family, forbidden in its handling, feared for the consequences of discovery. Thomas's mind raced, considering the options. He could step forward and confront the prince, demanding explanation, risking both the trust of the younger royal and the potential exposure of the object. He could wait, observing, hoping to manage the situation quietly. Or he could act decisively, retrieving the object to prevent staff exposure, placing himself between danger and the innocent. Every choice carried risk, yet hesitation now could ignite the very scandal the box threatened to unleash. A sudden metallic click drew his attention sharply. Harry had secured the contents once more, and Thomas realized the moment for decision had arrived. Every eye in the corridor could witness the unfolding drama at any instant. The staff were scattered, but nearby, the young aide trembling, the housekeeper unknowingly within earshot. The palace itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, walls whispering echoes of centuries of intrigue, of secrets revealed too soon, of consequences unforgiving. Thomas took a deliberate breath, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on Harry, and prepared to act. The tension had reached its peak. Whatever this object contained, whatever terror it carried, it was about to collide with duty, loyalty, and the unyielding vigilance of the palace guard. The first move, in a night of suspense, had already begun, and the ripple effects would soon cascade through Buckingham Palace like a storm long held at bay. Thomas Aldridge's gaze never wavered from Prince Harry. Every fiber of his being was alert, every sense sharpened by decades of guarding the royal family. The ornate box rested on the small table in the side chamber, its brass locks glinting faintly under the pale moonlight that spilled through the high window. The metallic scent lingered, subtle yet unmistakable, and Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. Whatever was inside that box carried power, secrecy, and danger in equal measure. Harry knelt beside it, whispering to himself as his fingers lingered over the carved lid. Thomas could not see the contents clearly yet, but he sensed their significance. The prince's eyes darted nervously toward the hallway, where the staff and junior aide had been carefully concealed moments earlier. The palace had trained its inhabitants well. Discretion was expected, but the aura around this visit suggested that even the seasoned staff would be unnerved by what Harry carried. The air seemed to thrum with tension, every creak of floorboards magnified in the stillness. A sudden noise from the corridor froze Thomas in place, a soft, hurried footstep, too deliberate to be coincidence. One of the senior aides appeared, moving with quiet authority, eyes scanning the corridor. He had not expected to encounter Harry in the Old West Wing, and did not yet see Thomas in the shadows. The guard realized instantly that intervention would be necessary if the aide stumbled into the chamber. The risk of scandal, of confrontation, of anger from the king, pressed down with an almost physical weight. Thomas shifted silently, using the shadows for concealment, and prepared to act. He could not allow anyone to witness the opening of the box yet. The consequences of premature discovery were unimaginable. The aide's eyes flicked toward the chamber, curiosity and suspicion warring in his expression. He took a cautious step forward, and Thomas made his decision. Moving faster than any ordinary observer could react, he emerged from the shadows, hand extended, placing a firm, commanding grip on the aide's shoulder. "Back," Thomas whispered, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Do not move closer. This is not a matter for anyone outside this chamber, do you understand?" The aide froze, pale and tense, and nodded slowly, retreating a step or two as Thomas's presence asserted itself. Even as he controlled this immediate threat, Thomas could not take his eyes off Harry. The prince was trembling slightly, the careful composure he usually maintained cracking under the weight of urgency and secrecy. Finally, Harry lifted the lid fully. Thomas's heart thudded in his chest as he saw, for the first time, what the prince carried: a small, intricately designed dagger, its hilt adorned with jewels that glinted faintly under the moonlight. The blade, polished to a deadly mirror finish, reflected the fear and anticipation in Harry's eyes. Thomas's instincts screamed at him. This was no ordinary ceremonial artifact. The dagger had a history, whispered in hushed tones among palace staff. A relic tied to power struggles, forbidden in handling, capable of inflaming fear and scandal if revealed. Harry's voice was barely audible, a whisper of caution and reverence. "It must be kept safe until the time is right." His words trembled with urgency, conveying the weight of a secret that could alter relationships and authority within the palace. Thomas's mind raced. This was no minor act of secrecy. The implications were enormous. A dagger like this, in the wrong hands, could provoke accusations, tension, even public scandal. And now, as Harry entrusted its care to the Old West Wing, Thomas was faced with the moral dilemma of his life: intervene and seize the dagger, exposing himself to the prince's ire, or allow the secret to proceed, risking chaos among the palace staff and beyond. The junior aide shifted slightly behind the marble pillar, the fear in his eyes unmistakable. He had no idea of the dagger's significance, yet instinctively understood that this was a moment of high stakes. Thomas gestured sharply, signaling him to remain silent and still. One wrong movement could unravel everything. A soft metallic click echoed suddenly from the chamber door. Thomas froze. Another figure had entered, the housekeeper, drawn perhaps by curiosity or routine. Her presence was dangerous. The air of secrecy had already been disturbed. Thomas moved swiftly, intercepting her with a hand on her shoulder, guiding her quietly back toward a hidden corner. The tension in the corridor thickened, every shadow a potential witness, every flicker of candlelight a harbinger of exposure. Harry looked up at Thomas, eyes wide. There was a mixture of fear, defiance, and something almost pleading in his expression. I cannot let it be seen." "Not yet," he whispered. Thomas nodded subtly, understanding the gravity of the prince's words. He was not merely a guardian tonight. He was a protector of secrets, a mediator between duty and moral responsibility, a bulwark against the potential unraveling of the palace's fragile trust. "Very well," Thomas said, his voice low but firm. "We will keep it secure. But understand this, Your Highness, the moment anyone else witnesses this, chaos will follow. We must act with precision and vigilance." His words were measured, carrying authority without confrontation. Harry exhaled, relief mingled with fear, as Thomas carefully placed himself between the prince, the box, and the potential intruders in the corridors. The tension in the chamber seemed to compress the air. Thomas sensed that any sound footstep, whisper, rustle of silk could ignite a cascade of panic. He scanned the shadows, eyes sharp, muscles coiled, ready to act. The dagger, small and deadly, gleamed with the history it carried, and the moral stakes were as heavy as the weight of the brass and jewels themselves. Thomas's mind turned over possibilities: confrontation with Harry, interception of the dagger, the need to maintain discretion, and the unrelenting responsibility to protect the palace and its inhabitants. Suddenly, a muffled sound came from the far end of the corridor. Another aide, senior and commanding, had entered, drawn by whispers or instinct. Thomas's eyes narrowed. The stakes had risen exponentially. He had seconds to act, to secure the dagger, to maintain the secrecy, and to prevent panic. The palace itself seemed to hold its breath, aware of the tension that filled the air, the history-laden walls waiting silently to witness what would unfold. Thomas moved decisively. With years of trained precision, he stepped into the light, intercepting the senior aide before they could approach the chamber. His presence was commanding, his voice a firm reminder of authority. "This area is restricted," he said evenly, gloved hand resting near the hilt of his sword. "Step back. You will not enter without proper sanction. Do you understand?" The aide froze, recognizing the seriousness in Thomas's stance and tone, and reluctantly retreated, nodding in deference. Harry exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. The dagger, dangerous and priceless, was secure for now. Thomas's mind, however, was already anticipating the next wave of complications, the potential discovery by other staff, the inevitable confrontation with King Charles, and the moral weight of having intervened without the prince's prior consent. The night was far from over. Thomas glanced briefly at the hidden junior aide and housekeeper. Their fear and awe were tangible, a reminder that even small observers could tip the balance of secrecy. He adjusted his stance, ready to respond to any further disturbances. The dagger was contained, Harry's intentions respected for now, but the consequences of this night would ripple through the palace, touching authority, loyalty, and the fragile trust that bound the royal household together. The old West Wing, silent yet charged, held its breath as Thomas Aldridge, sentinel and guardian, prepared for the challenges yet to come. He understood one immutable truth: the dagger, Harry's secret visit, and the staff who had glimpsed even fragments of it were a delicate equation of risk and responsibility. And every choice he made would determine who emerged unscathed and who would fall victim to the weight of royal intrigue. The old West Wing held its breath. Thomas Aldridge's eyes never left Prince Harry, the dagger glinting faintly under the moonlight. Every second felt elongated, the palace itself seeming to lean in, aware of the peril contained in the small chamber. Harry's hands trembled slightly as he rested the dagger on the carved table, the jewel-encrusted hilt catching the faint light and reflecting it in sharp, dangerous flashes. Thomas felt a bead of sweat slide down his temple, though his expression remained stoic. One wrong move, one exposed shadow, and the consequences would ripple far beyond this abandoned wing. "Harry," Thomas said quietly, voice firm but low enough not to alarm the hidden staff. "You cannot carry this alone. It is too dangerous." Too many eyes, too many potential witnesses. The prince's gaze flicked up at him, conflicted a mixture of fear, defiance, and trust. Thomas understood immediately that the dagger was not just a physical object. It was a symbol, a secret burden, a spark capable of igniting scandal, distrust, or even outright conflict within the royal family. I had no choice," Harry whispered. "It must remain hidden. No one must know until the right moment." His voice trembled with urgency. Thomas could sense the pressure pressing down on the younger royal, the fear that even a single slip could shatter the fragile order of the palace. He nodded slowly, understanding, but his instincts screamed that vigilance alone was not enough. The dagger had to be secured, yet the prince's intentions had to be respected. Thomas moved deliberately, positioning himself between the prince and the corridor entrances. The junior aide and housekeeper remained hidden, eyes wide, hearts pounding, acutely aware of the tension radiating from the chamber. The old West Wing, silent and shadowed for decades, had become a stage of quiet suspense, its walls echoing with centuries of secrets, intrigue, and peril. Tonight, another layer of history would be written in whispers and careful movements. The prince carefully lifted the dagger, inspecting the blade as though seeking reassurance in its familiar weight. Thomas's senses sharpened. The metallic scent, faint yet unmistakable, indicated a danger beyond mere ceremonial significance. This was a weapon, yes, but one that carried centuries of history, intrigue, and, perhaps, a curse of its own. The palace staff had always treated it with fear and awe, and now Thomas understood why. The power of what Harry held was not in its steel or jewels, but in the implications for loyalty, trust, and authority within the royal household. A soft creak echoed in the corridor behind them. Thomas froze instantly, hand hovering near the hilt of his sword. Another figure had approached one of the senior aides, stepping quietly but decisively into the hallway. His eyes narrowed, scanning the chamber, sensing something unusual. Thomas acted before the aide could glimpse the contents of the box, stepping into the doorway with measured authority. "This area is restricted," Thomas said evenly, voice low but carrying weight. "Step back immediately. You are not to proceed further without direct authorization." The aide froze, startled, and then nodded reluctantly, stepping back into the shadowed corridor. Thomas's heart continued to race, yet his resolve held firm. The dagger remained in Harry's possession, secure for now, but the pressure of the moment was far from over. Harry exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Thank you, Thomas," he whispered, eyes reflecting both fear and gratitude. I could not have done it without your protection." The words carried weight, a rare acknowledgement from a prince usually accustomed to moving independently, often disregarding protocol when secrecy demanded. Thomas merely inclined his head, recognizing the gravity of the trust placed in him. The old West Wing seemed to respond to the moment, shadows stretching and receding, the faint drafts whispering through the corridor like ghostly observers. Thomas's training told him the night was not yet complete. Every footstep, every sound, every shadow could bring discovery, and the weight of consequence hung thickly in the air. He shifted slightly, keeping himself and the prince between the dagger and any potential witnesses. The palace, grand and ancient, held secrets that had survived generations, and tonight it would gain another. A faint murmur reached Thomas's ears, coming from the corridor leading toward the main hall. Staff moving in the quiet of night, unaware of the danger they might stumble into. He signaled subtly to Harry to remain still, hand hovering protectively near the dagger. The moment was delicate. The tiniest misstep could expose them, and Thomas could not risk it. Every instinct screamed vigilance, every muscle coiled for immediate action. "Sir," whispered the junior aide from behind the column, voice trembling. Someone is coming this way. They might see." Thomas cut him off with a silent gesture, a measured glance that communicated the severity of the moment. The aide nodded, wide-eyed, and pressed himself further into the shadows, silently observing. Harry, with a steadying breath, placed the dagger back in its protective wrappings, securing it carefully. Thomas's eyes never left him, monitoring each movement. The prince's hands were steady now, but the tension in his body remained, a subtle reminder of the stakes involved. Thomas knew that the dagger's journey was not yet complete. Tonight was merely the first step in a chain of events that would test loyalty, courage, and discretion. A faint creak came again, closer this time. Thomas's hand moved instinctively, gripping the hilt of his sword, ready to confront the unknown intruder. But when the figure stepped into view, it was not a threat. Princess Charlotte, curious and unknowing, had wandered toward the corridor's edge, drawn by shadows and the faint metallic glint of the moonlight on the table. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene, innocent yet aware, a living reminder of the stakes Thomas had sworn to protect. "Charlotte," Thomas said softly, voice gentle but firm, "you must return to your quarters immediately. Stay there, and do not move until you are called." She hesitated, eyes reflecting a mixture of awe and fear, before nodding silently and retreating down the corridor. Thomas's gaze followed her briefly, then returned to Harry. The prince's relief was subtle but evident, as one small variable of chaos had been removed. The old West Wing had grown silent again, but the tension remained, a heavy undercurrent of anticipation and unease. Thomas and Harry were alone now, yet the night still carried threats. Discovery by the king, the implications of what Harry carried, and the potential for rumors to spread among staff and royal aides. Thomas exhaled slowly, centering himself. This night had tested his judgment, his loyalty, and his courage, but he had held firm. "Thomas," Harry said quietly, voice weighted with emotion, "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." Thomas inclined his head, acknowledging the trust and the silent gratitude, yet aware that the night was far from resolved. The dagger remained secure, the staff had been protected, and the prince's secrecy maintained, but the ripple effects would reach the palace in ways that neither he nor Harry could yet predict. A faint, deliberate footstep echoed in the corridor beyond the chamber, slow and measured. Thomas's gaze sharpened instantly. Someone else was approaching, their purpose unknown, their identity hidden by shadow. His instincts flared. This was the signal he had been anticipating. The night's drama was not yet over. The dagger, the secret visit, the potential for exposure all remained dangerously close to unraveling. Thomas stepped forward, sword hand ready, eyes scanning every inch of the hallway. The palace, ancient and vast, seemed to pulse with anticipation, aware of the confrontation yet to come. The shadows moved, the silence deepened, and the first figure emerged. And then the figure paused, just beyond the reach of the moonlight, a silhouette that would change everything. Thomas's heart tightened as the new variable in this night of secrecy and danger revealed itself. Someone who would force the loyal guard to act, to protect, and to confront what no one else in the palace was prepared to face.